Radio check. Loud and clear.
KSL Sports and KSL Podcast present Mode Push, an American view of F1, starting now.
I'm stuck. He's looking gut with his honestly.
I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you.
All right, everybody, welcome on in. It's another edition of Mode Push, the American view of F1 podcast, brought to you by KSL Sports, KSL Podcasts. Alex, Kirry, Dan Jimenez joining me as always, my co-host on the program. Dan, what's up, man? How are things, dude?
Things are good. It's like Christmas Eve. We're just the night before the cars really take to the track. So yeah. I'm getting super excited for this season.
We've been, this is the time where I go and just check all the message boards. I go and hang out in way too many places that are F1 based. I have found way more F1 fans over the last few weeks than I ever thought that we would, and here we are putting out another episode here. So we have a couple things that we want to do because we want to preview the start of the season. I mean, we are in race week here, and I actually try to do this thing, Dan, too, and maybe you do this. It's like when your birthday's coming up, you just don't do the countdown because then you'll think about it too much, and then suddenly here we are, and the Netflix Drive to Survive series has helped me, really kind of get ready for the season, and that we already previewed the first 5 episodes. And if you want to go back and listen to our last episode, you can go back and see what we thought of episodes 1 through 5, ending on Mar Snaffauer's trying to figure out what Alpine was going to do. I think the series does a great job, Dan, of going, you know what, this team, what I thought that I think you could make an argument that, these teams get screwed over in one aspect, but then they also end up making away with this thing pretty good. And I guess from a PR standpoint, you got to go, we made out better with Pierre Gasly than we ever could have with Oscar Piastri. And I actually kind of believe it now. When I watch that whole thing, I go, yeah, they might be in a better spot than having Pierre come to the team, the all-French lineup between he and Ocon.
Yeah, it's funny how they sell it after the fact. It's like, oh, this was the plan the whole time. But you could tell that really took Alpine by surprise, and Otmar kind of just got caught with his pants down, per se. And but I can see his point when he said, I'm just glad that, I have a driver in the seat that I can trust. Like, maybe we dodged a bullet if Oscar Piastri is kind of so willing to just kind of look out for himself. It was also like Oscar's tone and just kind of the kind of attitude he had in the chair. Yes. I'm like, dude, who are you? Okay, you're F2 champion, but you're already rolling into this Netflix
with a Max
interview
Verstappen
like you're Max
attitude.
Verstappen.
Yes, yeah. I thought the same thing. And now here's the thing too: is I've watched enough Maury Povich. Like when they do those old when they do those old things where they go, now we actually ran this through on a person who is able to read body language and see if you're lying. And when they asked Oscar Piastri, they go, so because I think they did the same thing. I don't think Oscar Piastri is as much of a tool as it made him look like, because
he definitely seemed like it.
But I don't think Nick DeVries is either. But they made him act like in the whole episode that they did with Yuki and AlphaTauri, they made it look like he was like, I must crush Yuki. It was weird. But when they asked Oscar Piastri about the whole thing afterward, they go, so do you regret any of this? He does this nod and then goes, absolutely not. And you're like, dude, I have seen, there's a little bit of regret in there. And if it's not regret, you know that you were in the wrong at least a little bit. And I don't care what he said. Look, I get it. We're all our own agents. You know what I mean? You got to work for yourself, and you got to find the best place for you. But congrats. You may have gotten more money out of McLaren, but I don't know when McLaren is going to have a competitive car.
Yeah. Yeah, I am totally with you on that. I think if he wanted to run for podiums, then he should have stayed at Alpine. But we'll see how that decision plays out. I just find it interesting that it seems like Netflix is just trying to drum up the new crop of heroes and anti-heroes,
Sure.
Heroes and villains. And I think they're like setting up both Piastri and DeVries as new
bad guys?
villains. Because like Yuki's the good guy. Everybody loves
nice.
Yuki. Everyone's pulling for Yuki. And then DeVries comes in. He's like, I'm running the show. And I think the same thing with Piastri, because it's like you have guys going out of the sport, like they're losing the star in Daniel Ricciardo. And it's like they just have to keep this crop of characters moving and like having a storyline that's engaging. And it's interesting, like the people that they don't really talk about. Like there was like one mention of Sebastian Vettel retiring in the whole season.
Somebody pointed that out and they were like, dude, Sebastian Vettel gets like 4.5 seconds of airtime. And most of the time it was when the stars of the other episodes that they were kind of doing were maybe passing him or whatever, on the road. Mm-hmm. And so they were like, what's the deal? How do you not honor this guy? And then there was this part of me, too, that went, yeah, but I bet Seb kind of loves it. Like, he's going, good.
He probably doesn't mind.
Don't bother me in my last season. I don't want to sit down with you guys. In fact, I could see him going, I actually don't want to. I don't want to. Let's focus on these new guys. I've had my time in the chair. It's fine. He seems like a guy who legitimately wouldn't care for that attention. Everybody else wanted to see some sort of like, farewell. But at the same time, by the end of the year, I was like, okay, yes, it is his last time racing at Suzuka, just like last week was his last race at this place and this race. Mm-hmm. So at some point, the farewell tour is fine. I'm more interested in the guys who are going to be in the seats next year too. But in terms of the episodes, the ones that like caught my attention, I thought the Daniel Ricciardo one. It's interesting looking back now, looking at the seats that were available. And I think we kept questioning it all year long, but it was even more so. After that episode, I went, how on earth does a guy like that not have a seat? Because every team just wants a guy who has the ability to win races, and has done it before, and has a lot of experience, and isn't really that old. And teams just seem to be off of Daniel Ricciardo. Is it because he's lost an edge that we're not necessarily seeing?
Yeah, I found that interesting too, because I remember last year us thinking like, why doesn't he just go to Haas? And then we heard Gunther Steiner on I think on this episode just saying like, look, he wants 10 million, and I don't know how that compares to what they're paying Nico Hülkenberg. I'm sure we could look it up, but like, is 10 million really that much more than what you're paying Nico to get a race winner in the seat? It felt short-sighted to me for Haas to not go after him, but it was interesting. They said like not even a phone call was made. So
right, they're notorious cheap wads. The Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget voice that they gave Gene Haas, it felt like during the season, was like, hello, Gene, what should we do? And he's like, you must break him. Like, it just turned into this weird... They never
show his face. Like, right. They should just have a camera from behind him and he's sitting in a chair.
Yes. And all it made it sound like was that Haas, if it cost $50, they weren't going to do it, which is not the case, but it definitely kind of felt like that because, they made a big deal out of Mick crashing all the cars, et cetera. And then the other thing that stood out to me in some of these episodes, I thought it was interesting they did spend a full episode on Yuki farting in the car with Pierre and
oh my gosh,
just the whole, like, I thought it was cute. They made him look like a real positive, like, kind of relationship there. And we found out this week, of course, too, when we earlier in the week, we talked about the possibility of AlphaTauri maybe not being a team in the future. And they put that to bed, or at least for the short term, saying that their stockholders have decided not to sell the team. And I can't believe you would even talk about it. That was kind of the attitude they gave to it. But so they're going to stick around as a team a little bit longer. That was kind of a weird storyline. Acting like Checo was less of a driver before he won the Monaco Grand Prix. Like, okay, now he earned his seat. I thought that was a little bit cheap too.
That was dramatized. Yeah, I didn't love that setup. And I also feel like they missed the whole story, because I felt like the story of the year between those two was
the drama that came from that race.
Yep, the drama that came from that race, and they just kind of glazed over the fact that like Sergio crashed on purpose, and that Max was pissed about that because he knew he had crashed on purpose, and then got him back at Interlagos in Brazil as like some sort of retribution, holding him to fourth place or something stupid. I just felt like that was the meat and potatoes of that relationship during the year, and they didn't touch on it at all, which I have to think that maybe with like Max, this being he had taken a year or two off from the Netflix thing, and now he's back this year and he's doing interviews. Maybe it was just his championship year that he didn't do any interviews for Netflix. but he's doing it this year. Maybe they're just like, we got to be really careful with Max and Red Bull. We don't want to piss them off, because then they'll just say, oh, we're out again. So like we have to like give them a ton of benefit of the doubt when it comes to this and the cost cap.
Well, it's probably also, I think it was also probably that. That's interesting, because I didn't think about it from that angle, but I did think, I bet they had really limited time in the seat with him anyway. And so they go, look, we have these maybe 1 or 2. I could see them saying, you get 1 shot with Max, find your whatever the thing is you're going to ask him and go with that. Because then with Checo is probably the same thing. I mean, the guy was as busy as Max was. What was interesting too is, and you said, I think before we even got on, you're like, yeah, a lot of these episodes were just, it was so Red Bull heavy. And yet you didn't really get the sense, and they do this every season, like they totally hid the fact that Red Bull ran away with this thing, and the race for the constructor's title wasn't even interesting at all.
Yeah, there was, and I don't know if I'll call it revisionist history, but there was a lot of like, just the way that they jump back and forth chronologically throughout the season. It's like, oh, like I thought we already talked about Monaco. Now we're talking about a race before that. Or it was just kind of hard to keep up with the timeline. If you weren't paying attention last year and, you're watching Netflix to get up to speed on what happened last year, you're just getting a totally different picture than how things actually played out. And like you said, they're just making it more dramatic than it actually was. Like they didn't even get into talking about how the FIA messed up the end of the Japanese
not
Grand
knowing
Prix
who won the championship,
not knowing who was the actual champion. Like I think that was another thing, is like we got to make the FIA look good too. So they barely touched on that. So yeah, I think as like a diehard fan, you watch the season summary and it doesn't really feel like a season summary in the traditional sense. It's more of just like, okay, what are some of the mic'd up quotes from the garage area that I didn't hear about last year that I'd find interesting now, that maybe would provide a little bit more color. But there's not really going to be much breaking news coming out of this that you didn't already hear last year.
Out of the new guys, I look and I go, okay, De Vries, Piastri, like which one really will? Because I think we put a lot of the points that Nick De Vries scored in that weekend with Williams that he had, which may have been actually just the deciding factor of how he got his seat so decidedly, quickly into this season. Which one of those two guys really does? Because we heard how scary and talented both of those guys are, which is what you tell everybody when you sign up a guy for, with really just what is a shot in the dark. Which one really has a chance to make waves in his first year?
Good question.
And maybe I should throw in, maybe I'm shorting you by not saying Logan Sargent either, but
yeah, I would put my money on Oscar Piastri. I think he's going to be in better equipment than the AlphaTauri, and I think his experience from Formula 2 is more applicable than Nick De Vries' Formula E championship. And I think just from like the impression I got in those interviews, that I feel like Nick De Vries coming in with more of a sense of, I don't know, not superiority, but like there was that one section or the one part of that episode where they were interviewing him and they said like, are you, what are you going to learn from Yuki? And his response was like, I should learn nothing from Yuki. I should do the opposite of whatever he does. Or I'm paraphrasing, but I was like,
and they kind of laughed it off a little bit, but they actually tried to probably bake that up a little bit more too. Like it was, I must break him. It was weird. I thought that was funny because, in the end, these guys, I was shocked actually that Yuki that they were so set in him having that seat back again. And I was also shocked in the episode that they rolled out for him. They made it look like he scored 1 point all season. They go, they show that one race and he scored P10, good point. He's like, it's so good to get a point. And you're like, that's it. And they go, yeah, but just, Pierre Gasly he scores a ton of points. And Yuki has to figure out how to do that. And it was like, then I had to go back and go, it was like 23 points to 16 points. Like, that's not some insane difference. Yeah, it's like you had to make it look like this guy barely got anywhere in this race. Now, Yuki is a freaking wild card. But I'll tell you, I mean, there's a reason he's in the seat that he is. And you forget how good these racers all are, by the way, if they're on the grid.
Yeah, no, he's fast for sure. I think he gets his consistency down, which comes with experience. I think he could be like a really great driver. And I'm looking forward to this season to see what now, I guess, two seasons, full seasons look like versus Nick DeVries coming in as a true rookie. I'm interested in looking up the 2023 salaries. Nick DeVries, $2 million, Yuki still at $1 million.
Wow. I wonder what is going on with that. What is going on with that? That is like, you know what? Nick DeVries' agent, great job, because that Formula E championship goes a lot further than I guess anything else would these days. There you go.
I guess, yeah.
What was Nico Hulkenberg's?
Hulkenberg,
if you don't mind me asking,
he's $2 million, and K-Mag is $5 million.
So you know what?
So compared to the 10 that
maybe that is a lot. They are
difference.
Listen. Maybe Dr. Claw is a cheapskate after all. We weren't giving him enough credit. I thought it was awesome, like when they showed during, I think it was earlier in the season, Gunther on his lake there in North Carolina. I'm like, you know what? You guys can say whatever you want. This dude from the Alps loves this little lake situation there in North Carolina.
Yeah, that's actually where I used to live. That's Lake Norman.
Oh,
so that's
my gosh.
north of, So I think the Haas shop is in Concord, which is where the Roush shop was, where I worked. And everybody wants to live on the lake there, and it's beautiful. And I mean, there's a lot of mosquitoes, but if you get over the mosquitoes, then it is as nice as it looked there on Netflix.
That was awesome. Okay, so how much more do Toto and Christian Horner hate each other now? After the whole cost cap episode where they're going back and forth with the, Horner's quick to bust out the FUs and, and not be apologetic. And it's a good year to do it because he's winning the whole thing by 250 points or whatever it was. So at the end of it, do these guys, is there still some professionalism between them? Or, I mean, Toto feels like they made him out to be this robotic, like revenge-seeking German, and they might be freaking right.
Yeah, I don't think it's too far off from reality. There's zero love lost between those two guys. I think they keep it professional for most of the time, but as soon as there is an angle that they can attack the other, they're both going straight at them in the media. And it was kind of coming from all angles for the cost cap stuff. It was interesting to see Horner go after Mattia Binotto before the Singapore race. I think it was. He stopped him there on Parc Ferme and was like, why are you saying these things about us in the media? And Mattia was saying, his response was like, I didn't name your team, but it was obvious who he was talking about. I don't think anyone feels bad at all for whatever came to Red Bull and Christian Horner. I think there is a bit of us versus them now. Like, how many times did we have to hear Christian Horner say, the higher you get, the sharper the knives? I think they said that about like 20 times. So I'm never going to forget that Christian Horner phrase, but it's true. That's, they've got the target on their back.
You know who got more episode time than Seb and probably half the drivers on the grid was Ginger Spice. Like, my goodness, how much did we have to hear their conversations at the dinner table and on the paddock? She just was like acting like she's the team principal, walking around herself. I guess she probably bosses people around more than we thought. I'm looking at this thing and I'm seeing how the episodes went. I really did like the season, though. I wondered, though, how much it actually brings people in now to the sport, or if the new Drive to Survive series is now more catered to people who are already in, because there's less of an explanation. You remember how in the old first two seasons or so, it's like trying to explain to you how the weekend worked, trying to explain to you the tire compounds. Maybe that's not sexy anymore, but I do think that that's the kind of stuff that you miss if you're a new person into F1. The now just the drama seems a little bit more confusing more than it does anything else.
Yeah, I think you're right. It does feel like it's more edited and catered towards the educated fan than it used to be. I think it did a great job. Overall, I give it high marks. It got me amped for the next season. It was a good refresher on all the major storylines, even if they missed, I think, some of the juicier details they could have gotten into. But I thought it was great, timed super well. Like, I would say every other major professional sports league is envious of Drive to Survive and its ability to bring in new fans and hype the base going into the season. That, like we see with, I think there's the Full Swing documentary on Netflix for the
golf.
PGA. And I think there's a tennis one now too that they're trying to replicate it. But I think there's something unique about the sights and sounds of a Formula One race that you don't get as much with some of these other like stick and ball sports that I think makes it even more engaging. So I think it's a great part of the sport, and expect it to continue.
I'm offended by stick and ball sports. I feel like
that wasn't a diss. That was just a categorical description.
That's fine. I'm as big a fan of the stick and balls as I am the wheels. I do love how crazy the technology's come with camera work, and just how awesome it is to watch these things now. And yeah. I don't know if I was convinced by anybody that I do think that. Oh, speaking of, oh my heavens! So we've officially. I'm going to say something, Dan. I have never done any fantasy sport in my life. Okay. Now,
really, I would have thought you were a big fantasy football guy.
I am a sports talk show host. Is my day job. I don't do it because it's like this thing where I'm like, I talk about freaking football all day, and
yeah,
it's a hard thing to explain. Like, I'm talking about more football. Like, and I had it pop up, and so our little Twitter group has a we have a fantasy, and I got right freaking on there. Yes, I think yours is pretty easy to find. It was the Utah Shaggin' Wagon, right?
I've got the AMG Shaggin' Wagon.
Yeah.
So they let you build 3 teams.
I've got
AMG Shaggin' Wagon,
Oh.
which is Mercedes and Aston Martin.
You're like my kid in fantasy football. You're like, well, one of my teams is winning.
And then the second one is Koskappen, and that's Red Bull and Haas.
Oh, that's right.
And then my third one is the Pelosi Tifosi.
Oh, that's you. Okay. Now
Ferrari
I am
and Alpine.
I am SMB mate. Do you know the reference?
Yes. I was trying to think of a way to incorporate that. I was like, oh, I don't know if this will get flagged.
I know. I was like, but I initially had put Toto's Pumpernickel, but it was taken. Somebody across the world and somewhere.
Someone already had that one.
Of course. I was like, hi, I'm so stupid. Of course. Somebody's got Toto's Pumpernickel all day.
Cool.
Okay. Actual race this weekend. What do you expect to happen? I was shocked today to read a quote from George Russell that said, Red Bull is in its own league above everybody else right now. And I always wonder where guys' comments come from that. So take with that what you will, because even with that, we kind of heard that last year, but then Ferrari also was very, very, competitive right off the bat, and they were actually the ones to beat, I think, off the bat. Now Red Bull seems like they're in some sort of weird atmospheric, picking up where they left off last year. But then he said, it'll be interesting because the fight that they're going to have with Aston Martin. And I thought, wow, that's, we're not joking about the speed that Lawrence Stroll's team has found suddenly.
Yeah, and all that is coming from the winter testing that was last week, that the times that Aston Martin showed over the long run. Like, Ferrari's still much quicker over a 1-lap pace than Aston Martin, but Aston Martin's maintaining their tires better. And that was the big advantage that Red Bull had last year, is that Max was just able to maintain his tires longer than everybody else and keep the speed up over the long run. And that's what Aston Martin showed during the test that everyone is starting to get excited about, and thinks that in a race pace, they may be the second fastest. But you had Freddie Vasseur also quoted this week as saying, like, you don't really know what everybody has. You don't know what we have, because you don't know how much fuel somebody's running, how much weight they have on the car during those tests. And so we won't really know until the race weekend comes. And then on the Mercedes side, apparently, according to George Russell, which is so funny that a lot of these updates about how Mercedes is doing are coming from George, not Lewis or Toto, but George is running his mouth. And he said that they fixed a lot of the balance issues that they had during the race weekend. So I think everyone's going to come faster than they showed in testing, and hopefully that closes the gap to Red Bull. So I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be very interesting tomorrow in free practice and qualifying on Saturday.
So you had your teams picked. I think that I actually, I don't know, I get a little bit low self-esteem when I start picking teams in the fantasy for our fantasy F1 league that we have. I feel like a 15-year-old. They go a fantasy F1 league. So I basically went full, like, it was kind of weird. I went Red Bull for the team.
Mhm.
But like all my drivers, because I think we picked 5, right? You picked 5 drivers per.
5 drivers, yeah.
Okay, so the 5 driver lineup that I have are basically all the number 2s, if that's appropriate to say. So it's like your Checo, Carlos. I want to say I put K-Mag up there though because I was like I'm feeling okay about. I don't know why, that might be some dark horse points there somewhere. I definitely got Fernando, and now that I hear about the Aston Martin's speed, I'm like really excited about that. And then I think I ended up picking one more random one. Oh, Pierre Gasly, I think, just to see if Alpine was going to be one of those. So I don't know who's going to get it in there. And if you're the guy who went Charles and Max, and then Nick DeVries and Hulkenberg, Logan Sargent, then God bless you. But I'm sticking with these guys that I think for the long haul will get you some of those.
Okay,
it's the third, fourth, and fifth.
Yeah.
It's the third, fourth, and fifth drivers that are going to get you those wins. I think overall.
Yeah, that's a good strategy. I was debating on the strategy. You go heavy on the first 2 and then really cheap on the rest. But I like your strategy. I saw a stat the F1 put out that Fernando Alonso was the most selected driver of F1 teams in the fantasy across the world. And I think that's just given the hype around Aston Martin, and in the game he's 8.3 million a year, so he's on the relatively cheap side. So I don't know, it'll be fun to play this. Like you, I never really got into fantasy football. I did fantasy NBA when I was in high school or whatever, but this is the first time I've gotten back into fantasy sports. We'll see how it goes. All
right, so who gets the win this weekend? Then after everything, who's going to be on the podium, and then who's going to be the guy representing the constructor, spraying everybody with champagne as well?
Oh, that's a good question. I got to say Max wins, and I think you see a Ferrari and an Aston Martin podium. So maybe let's go Max, Charles, Fernando, and Christian Horner's up there collecting the first trophy of the constructor championship.
I think that definitely it's going to be Christian up there. I think it's going to be a Red Bull 1-3, and then I'm going to throw Fernando in there for that P2, just because I think I'm going to see some DNFs early in the season from Ferrari. That's what I'm banking on.
Man.
Could happen.
Yeah, if passes prologue, you're probably right.
Dan, I'm excited about this thing, man. We're gonna fire it up, of course, as we've done, just like we did last year. We're on our 27th episode today. Tell your friends, teach your neighbors about F1, get them going. I've converted some folks on the newest edition of Drive to Survive. I said start with season 3 or so, and then you'll kind of at least recognize some of these names. So, Dan, excited about this weekend, man. We'll chat again on Sunday, I think, when we start to break this thing down.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, man.
There you go. Dan Jimenez, Alex Kirry. It is the F1 podcast sweeping all of the Western United States and soon the world. It's Mode Push. We'll see you next time, everybody.